Okay, so we're looking at interest groups. Let's define an interest group real quick. There are people who have like-minded ideas, and they're going to try to promote their agenda, their goals. How are they different than political parties? Well, political parties fight election battles. Interest groups aren't. And interest groups could get involved in an election. They might support Republicans or they might support Democrats. They may choose a side, but the reason they're choosing that side is because they feel that that political party is more likely to help them advance their policy agenda that they support than the other side would. Interest groups also differ because they are policy specialists, where political parties are going to be policy generalists. So that's going to be a major difference. So why do interest groups sound bad? Why do they get bad press? Why do we have negative views of them? Well, one, we started off having negative views of them because, well, the founding fathers didn't like them, right? Madison was afraid of factions. We didn't like the idea of having organized groups and how that could be tearing down our political institutions, this idea of factions. Also, dishonest lobbyists typically get press, and we think of lobbying itself, right? Pressuring politicians, either pressuring them through rewards or pressuring them through punishments, maybe rewarding their opponents the next election. Both types are a way to influence, right? And dishonest lobbyists, maybe bribe or break laws, give too many gifts, or these kind of things, they're going to get way more press than honest lobbyists who are just trying to pressure or maybe reward politicians who promote their interests. So now the term lobbying kind of has a general connotation. So let's review the theories of democracy and these pluralist, elite and class, and hyper-pluralist ideas that we went over in the first section or first unit of this class. Pluralism. Hold on, we're having some difficulties getting it to load. Pluralism. Politics is a competition between groups, and each one has a fair shot. Each one is trying to get their agenda passed, and one is going to be stronger, and one is eventually going to win at the end of the day, or we're going to get a compromise somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle. This is the idea, right? That we have many centers of power, many groups, and they're diverse and they're competing. And no one group is going to win or lose all the time. They're going to pull each other. There may be a compromise that comes out of it. Groups are competing. No one's going to become dominant. They all have the same rules. They all know the rules. They're all playing by the rules. And lobbying, is open to all, and it's not a problem. It's just you trying to influence your politicians to vote the way that you feel best represents you. Now, elitism, or elite and class theory, is the idea that societies are divided along class lines, and that obviously the rich or the upper class know the rules, wrote the rules, and know how to bend them to help the rich the best. So they're going to rule regardless of whatever type of organization you have. There's numerous groups. They don't mean anything because the real people that have the power are the rich and the upper class. Today, we would probably infer these to be the largest corporations, right? Especially the transnational corporations. They hold the most power. The power is strengthened by a system of interlocking corporations and institutions. They're the one running things. These corporations and their CEOs are willing to lose minor policy battles, but they're going to win the major policy issues, right? And lobbying is a power because the people who lobby best are the biggest corporations, and so they're going to win when it's crunch time. Let's keep going. Hyperpluralism is the idea that there's so many groups that they are weakening the government. This is an extreme and exaggerated form of pluralism, and really what keeps us going is iron triangles. Iron triangles being in a connection between the interest group, congressional committee, and an administrative or executive agency. So for example, if we were talking about environmental policy, The way we would accomplish environmental policy would be a group like Sierra Club, the interest group, working with the congressional committee that oversees environmental policies. And then they would also talk to the Environmental Protection Agency, right, who is an executive agency. So you see the connection between those three groups and how they would really talk to each other and make sure that environmental policy benefited those groups. That's an iron triangle. Many sub-governments, iron triangles, aggravate the process. There's too many of those. There's a revolving door of government that these three organizations are, working the whole policy. When the government tries to please all these groups, the policies become confusing, contradictory, and then the more of these groups that get involved, the more that the system shuts down. So here's a list of the big 25 interest groups, or some of the big 25, the ones who maybe have the most political clout. The NRA, AARP, NAACP, the Right to Life, American Medical Association, American Hospital Association, Motion Picture Association. So you see some of the really big ones. And the reason interest groups are maybe ineffective sometimes is maybe because they're too large. We have this issue of the free rider, that people aren't joining. They're just benefiting from the group's activity without officially joining and officially paying the dues. Right, and this would explain the right to work laws and how these bust unions. So, a union is an organization that fights for workers' rights and benefits and higher pay and all those kind of things. So that's what a union does. And the union requires, when you get hired, that you join the union. You have to. You don't have a choice. And you also pay dues each month, right? Because they're representing you, they're giving you higher wages and your benefits. You don't get the choice, all those kinds of things. Then Republicans, who typically have political battles with the union, will pass right-to-work laws, which allow a choice when you get hired whether you want to join a union or not. So a union's been around. It's been fighting for higher wages and better benefits. But when you're hired, you could choose to not join that union. You're still going to get the wages and the benefits, but now you don't have to pay the dues and all of those kind of things that come along with joining. So this would create a free rider problem. So when you're asked about right to work laws, know that they create the free rider problem and help destroy the union by allowing people to choose to get the benefits but not join the group. Smaller groups are better organized. They're easier to organize. They're more focused. This is why maybe a consumer group that has to represent a whole consumer industry would have difficulty being organized. Smaller groups are maybe easier in that way. They also have a higher intensity, especially if they're a single issue group. They only care about one focus, one narrow interest, and they're not going to compromise on that because that's their whole ball game. That's what they care about. So there's a very high intensity. The group that would, or the issue that would typically explain this would be abortion. Many groups focus on this as an emotional issue. That's going to give them an advantage during the debate, and they're not going to compromise during it. They're also more likely to use unconventional participation, whether that's a protest or civil disobedience, rather than just writing or their congressmen or donating to campaigns or working on campaigns. They're going to do some things to get attention because they've on this issue, because they care about this issue. They have a very high intensity for this issue. Financial resources. Not all groups have the same amount of money. That kind of goes with common sense. The more members you have, maybe the more money you have. Or if it's a single issue group, maybe the more intensity you have and the more people are willing to donate higher amounts. And remember that monetary donations are going to translate into access for politicians. You're going to be able to get a meeting if you donated a lot of money to that politician's campaign. That doesn't mean they're going to vote the way you're lobbying them to vote, but they may be more willing to sit with you and talk about how to make the law less bad for your organization. So there is a bias towards wealthier groups. They're going to get more access because they donate more money. But that does not mean that they necessarily win the policy arena. So we've been using this word lobbying, and that just means that you're communicating to a decision maker on behalf of someone else in hopes of influencing that decision. And you can either do that on behalf of a group because you're in that group, or you can do that because you're just hired temporarily. Lobbying can be a source of information. They become experts. They're really great on their policy issues, and they can help politicians plan and even write legislation. Now, the only people who can propose legislation formally on the floors of Congress would be congressmen, but lobbying can help, or lobbyists can help write it. Lobbyists can also help politicians plan political strategies for their reelection, help them in the future get reelected. They're also going to provide ideas and innovations that maybe are going to be used as policy, and eventually those politicians would like to take credit for. Electioneering, this would be an interest group getting directly involved in the election process, maybe helping the politician campaign, maybe creating attack ads, but getting their hands dirty. And political action committees are used for this purposes. They're used by corporations and unions to donate money and maybe other interest groups to donate money and help run campaigns. And they get to choose where that money goes. If an interest group is not winning through legislation, they might use litigation to try to get their policy agenda adopted. Interest groups can file amicus curiae briefs in which the court cases to support their position. They also sue through a class action lawsuit, which lets a group of people sue on behalf of the entire group, and they all split the awards. Part of having a good interest group is managing the public relations, having a good public image. And they use market strategies. They use public opinion polls that we've talked about in the past. And they're going to try to maintain a good public image because they want to have money coming in so they can advertise to get their issue passed, get their agenda accomplished. So let's keep going. What kind of interest groups do we have? We have economic interest groups, whether that's the Chamber of Commerce or farmers or unions. There'll be environmental interest groups like the Sierra Club. I guess maybe we could include PETA and animal groups in this organization. There are equality interest groups, NAACP, the LGBT groups. Any of these were fighting for equality. Maybe consumer and public interest groups like the AARP. They're fighting for elderly people who are have a whole diverse range of issues that they would like action upon. So how do interest groups affect democracy? Well, a wide open government is going to force these groups to compete, counterbalance each other. This is kind of a pluralist idea. The more groups mean the more lobbyists, and thus maybe better democracy. Other groups argue that these interest groups are not equal, and some are getting way more attention than they should, especially the rich, the really wealthy groups, and that's detrimental for democracy. But interest groups, they exist because they have a set of agenda that they care about and they want to get accomplished, and they want to maintain policies and programs that benefit them or create new ones that help them, right? And they're going to do that through pressuring government officials, maybe donating to their campaign or threatening them to donate to an opponent's campaign. There's two sides to that. They're going to be pressuring politicians to accomplish their agenda when possible. So thanks for listening. Good luck on the exam.